Even as I started the process of writing my first book, Dare to Become, and going through the publishing process and starting to market the book, I realized at the end of the day, this is my labor of love. And while I can hire really great folks to help me market it, it still requires that I roll up my sleeves and I do the work.
Hello there. Welcome back to the My Future Business Show. It is always wonderful to have you back with us. And if you are new to the show, today I have somebody very special lined up, because on today's show, I have the pleasure of welcoming founder, CEO, and author Julie Cropp Gareleck to talk about her latest book, Dare to Become: From the Corner Booth to the Corner Office. Welcome to the show, Julie.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Absolutely wonderful to have you here. Now, just prior to the call, you and I were having a wonderful conversation about all things to do with Atlanta. Tell me a little bit about Atlanta. You're calling in from Atlanta.
Yes, calling in from Atlanta. Atlanta is busy, although this is the slowest time of year as folks are coming in and out from vacation, but it's hot this year in the
Oh,
South. So we're staying quite warm these days.
yeah, I seem to be the sort of middle of the road type of person myself. I don't like too hot, too cold, kind of like the porridge scenario. How about you?
Yep. I agree. I agree. If it's over 90 degrees, I'm very miserable, but anything up until that point, and I'm happy. It could be 20 degrees, it could be 40 degrees, it could be 85. But you get me over 90 and I just stay in the air conditioning all day
Oh,
long.
yeah, I hear you. Absolutely, Julie. Now, tell me, what do you love about Atlanta?
I love Atlanta because it's such a growing city. It's unlike most other cities in the US in that there isn't just a downtown area. There are a lot of great communities and suburbs that are growing that are known for certain things. So I love that it's transient. I love that we're welcoming a ton of new residents here every month from all over the country. I myself am originally from Pennsylvania, so I'm a transplant to Atlanta, and it's always great to see a great mix of people here.
So, what are the I guess the highlights of the location for you? Do they have any sort of major landmarks that people would be familiar with? And if you're a tourist,
Well,
what should you look out for?
so I'm probably the wrong person to ask, but they
Ah,
do have an aquarium that's really well known. They've got,
mhm.
of course, the World of Coke for all of those Coke product lovers out there. But I will say Atlanta's become quite the foodie town. So if
Oh,
you love great restaurants, it's definitely the place to be.
so you sound like you're a bit of a foodie. Would that be fair?
Well, so I will say I'm a vegetarian.
Oh,
So what I love is being able to go to these restaurants and have unbelievable selections. So I will say most places you go, they have a salad and they have a vegetarian lasagna. But with all of the different restaurants that we have, there's always great vegetarian options. So while I may not be a foodie for the different meats and flavors, I will say I love it because they always have a great vegetarian meal.
now opening up in the call earlier when we spoke, I mentioned how well you're looking. You obviously look after yourself. Tell me a little bit about, I guess, do you get into sports? What do you do? What do you do in your pastime?
Yeah, so I mean, my background prior to kind of as I'm approaching middle age, but was always a runner, was always very active. And
Mhm.
so now I honestly stick to a lot of cardio, some Pilates, but it's part of my daily routine. It helps me clear my mind, it helps me stay focused. Because the days are long sometimes. So it's helpful to get a good sweat in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I get up early in the morning. I was up at 5 this morning just because I feel like I'm wasting the day, and the days do seem to fly past when you get older, don't they?
Yeah, yes,
Uh,
they do.
well, tell me a little bit about what life was like growing up. You said you were a transplant to Atlanta. Where did you grow up?
Yeah, I was so lucky. I grew up in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, which is
Oh,
known
wow.
certainly for the Civil War significance that it
Yes.
has. So, definitely when I grew up there, it was a much smaller town than it is now. But it was honestly idyllic. It was a fantastic place to grow up. It's a fantastic place to raise a family. And while my 16-year-old self wanted more restaurants and we wanted more places to go, I will say that it just has a very unique charm, very rich in history, and just a really great, like I said, great place to grow up.
Yeah, fantastic feedback. Thank you so very much. Now, given I guess, the expanse of land around Gettysburg, did you ever have pets growing up?
So we weren't allowed to have pets. I believe I had a hamster for a year. But no, I mean we didn't have any animals, but I mean certainly around that area, there's so much beautiful farmland going towards Lancaster, towards Philadelphia, towards Maryland, where the
Yep.
Mason Dixon line is. So definitely a very agricultural center as well. So
Yeah.
no animals myself, but I had friends that did.
Yeah, well, look, I remember growing up, I had some fond memories. The only rules that I had when I was growing up, Julie, was that I had to be home when the street lights came on. Did you have anything like that growing up?
Oh, absolutely. We weren't allowed in the house. Are you kidding me? That sun came up. My mom said, "Get outside. You can come back for lunch, and if you're thirsty, you can get water from the hose."
Oh,
So
that's great.
so I completely understand those days.
And it's funny, if you did actually enter the house, you ended up doing chores, didn't you?
Yes, yes, they put us to work. They didn't want us in the house, and I have to say now as a mother, I have, daughters who are 9 and they don't play outside as much as they used to, right? Just because of safety or because we're concerned about what might happen, but,
Mm,
I will say my parents were very smart on that because they didn't have to deal with us, 8 to 10 hours of
yeah.
every weekend day.
Yeah, well, it's funny you should say that. I was thinking the very same thing. I have young children as well, and I think today's technology is great, and I think there's a place for it. But I put it this way: I used to sleep outside in the front on a hammock, where
Mhm.
on basically adjacent to a street, and people would walk past that you didn't know, and you weren't fearful, were you back then?
No, no, we weren't. I mean, there would be times where we would be out with, other neighbors, other kids in our neighborhood. We had one of those neighborhoods where there was a rat pack of all of us, and
Yeah.
we would be riding bikes, we would be hiking trails behind the house, but we were never really afraid of someone coming and taking us. We weren't afraid of strangers per
No.
se, kind of coming into our neighborhood. And I will say now, as a parent, I mean, we have cameras on every entrance. We have
Yes.
sensors on every window, and it's just, I guess, the way life has shifted a bit.
So tell me, you have multiple businesses, and I can only imagine, I guess, the load that puts on you from any given day or week or month or year for that matter. What do you do in your relaxation time, and how important is it to get some time away from the businesses?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, running businesses is definitely difficult. I will say that I've been doing it. I've been out of college for 25 years. I've run one of the businesses for 15, several others for a couple of years, and I will say that it's really, really important to take breaks during the day. One of the things I learned when I did have children, I was already a CEO of my marketing agency, and I had to learn how to set boundaries. So instead of being available 24/7, I had to really put boundaries in place so that I would come home from work. I would have time to spend with my children before they went to bed. And then if I needed to do work after they were in bed, I could. And so I do still leave the office when possible at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
I, try to take my evenings to work out, spend time with my family. And then likewise on the weekends, if I do need to work, I try to save that for Sunday night because typically the kids are getting ready to start their school week.
Oh,
So
yes.
it gives me a few hours, but boundaries are super important to staying to staying alive
Same.
with the businesses. And that's also why I mentioned the fact that I love to work out too, because without that, I don't think I would get a break or just a mental break from all of it.
Well, it's interesting you should say that because I always talk about mindset on the show because everybody has a very different perspective. Some people don't really focus on it. Where are you at with mindset? How important is that for you?
Mindset has become more important, I think, as I've aged.
Mhm.
And I think some of that comes from just aging, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the things that used to keep me up at night don't keep me up at night anymore. But I will say that I have more of a practice around, positive mental thoughts,
Yeah.
really trying to give myself a boost on a regular basis and really trying to stay level is the word I like to use.
Mhm.
It's difficult to do sometimes. So I'm a work in progress, but I do think sometimes taking a pause and being mindful and running through whether it's exercises or listening to meditation, it really just gives you a moment to have gratitude for what you do have. And it can also sometimes lessen some of the negative sides of life too, just by being mindful.
Great feedback. Thank you so very much. Now, I mentioned earlier how early I get up, and I typically go to bed around about the same time of an evening. Do you find that due to work demands and family demands that you go to bed late, or are you an early riser? How does the day work for you?
Yes, I'm one of those lucky folks that if I get 6 hours, I that's like my sweet spot. If I get 8, then I feel like I'm a little bit lazy throughout the day. But no, I'm on a good routine. I do try to go to bed, not early, but, certainly by 11. I'm usually up by quarter of 6.
Yep.
Unless there's something that I need to work on, but I really do try to keep a routine,
Yep.
because that does help as well.
So, from just a contextual basis, Julie, tell us a little bit about, I guess, your educational background and your experiences in the, I guess, the corporate world.
Yeah, absolutely. So after I graduated from high school, I went to Shippensburg University, which is a Pennsylvania state school. Had a great experience there. And when I graduated, I had an opportunity to go to Boston University's internship program in Paris, France, where I moved to Europe and worked for a PR agent for fashion photographers for 6 months and learned how to do public relations in another language. So
Wow.
definitely a great way to start my career. It was a great experience, definitely a profound experience for me. I learned how to live on my own, make friends, and also operate in a language. While it was my second major in college, it's very different from going from a classroom to actually utilizing your French
Yes.
in a work setting.
Yeah.
So it definitely forced me to grow up and mature in ways that I really appreciate now. But after that experience, I did move back to the States so I could be closer to my family and moved to Philadelphia and started working at an entrepreneurship institute, working with early stage and startup companies on whether it was marketing or feasibility plans or business plans, and really giving them tools and resources to help them start and grow their business. After doing that for 2 years, I moved and was recruited actually by a venture capital organization to come over and do similar things with companies that were looking for funding between 1 and 5 million. And I would essentially look at their business plans, marketing models, financial models, and provide recommendations to the investment community. As potential, investments for
Yes.
them.
Yeah, fantastic. I always think about, people who travel like yourself and the differences of, I guess, perception of the workplace and culture. How
Mhm.
has traveled and working abroad, I guess, impacted the way you operate your businesses? Has it had any impact?
It has had an impact, a great impact. I feel as though if there is anyone that is in college, leaving college, or has an opportunity to, whether it's to go to a different city, work on the East Coast, work on the West Coast, or even go to Europe, for whether it's schooling or for a job, I think it's really important. When I lived there, it's like I said, it forced me to grow up, but I think what it also gave me was it gave me these tools where I was essentially on my own for all intensive purposes. No one knew where I was. And remember, this was before mobile phones. This was
Yes.
before technology had really hit its stride.
Yep.
And you have that reality where you're really in a foreign place, you really don't know anyone, and it really forces you to start to create a path for yourself. And so it gave me a great perspective, even working in Europe, to see the differences between running a business, let's say in Paris, and running a business in the United States. And it definitely gave me a great appreciation for what we do have here. But it also opened my eyes to what other communities or environments are faced with, as it relates to business. So I definitely would encourage anyone to take any opportunity they can. And then certainly in my career, like I said, I started in Philadelphia and I'm now in Atlanta. And I've just had great opportunities to travel to a lot of cities for business.
Mhm.
And it's always great to experience those cultures and also different, cultures within each city.
Yeah, that's great feedback. Thank you so very much. Now, I know that you started out early on working in the family business. Tell us a little bit about that experience and why that was important for you.
Absolutely. When I was in high school, my parents worked for, my dad worked for a corporation, my mother worked for a bank. So both of them very much on the corporate career track. And as we were teenagers, my sister and I, my parents started investing in real estate properties, and they would teach us how to drywall, teach us how to paint. We would help them fix up houses that they could then flip and sell.
Yep.
And we thought that was as hard as it was going to be. But when I was 16, my father sat my sister and I down and said, "Hey, do you want the good news or the bad news?" And I don't think we were quite prepared for either. Um, but he had actually made the decision to quit his job after more than 20 years with one company, and actually invest in a local restaurant called the Avenue Restaurant in Gettysburg. And that really kickstarted a wonderful experience for us as a family. It's also really what motivated me to write my first book. But it was really instrumental in that early foundation of work ethic for me. When you're 16 and you can't go out with your friends until you've, bust 15 tables
Oh
and
yeah.
done dishes and,
Yep.
and helped mop the floors,
Yep.
it's definitely a character builder
That's
for
an eye
sure.
opener. Wonderful. It's funny. I always think about my first time as an entrepreneur, the first time I was given $1 for something. And I think to myself, mine was washing cars. Can you recall your very first experience prior to the business?
Do you mean prior to
To
working
your
for my
family's
parents?
business, yeah. Did you ever have any experiences like that?
I did. I mean, being that it was a Civil War town and it was a big tourist town, I worked for the Gettysburg Tour Center, and I was
Oh,
actually the hostess on top of the double-decker buses. I had to give a spiel and make sure that people didn't stand up. Um,
that
and
is
I
cool.
and I also worked in the gift shop there as well. So, I mean, that was my first job, right? Aside from babysitting when I was a child.
Mhm.
But it really that work was very different than working in a restaurant.
See, all those
I worked in
little all those little steps along the way, they do contribute to the, I guess, the person that you've become today, which is fantastic. Now, when did you know that you wanted to go out on your own and start your own businesses? What was the catalyst for that?
It's interesting because you would think because I had the experience working for my parents and watching them, build a business for themselves, that would be the catalyst. I will say I swore for the better part of 8 years that I would never go into business because it was too difficult and it had been, a hard experience. But as I started my career, I was in different work environments, and I will say that along the way, I was disappointed by what some of the work environments offered. It wasn't necessarily that there was an opportunity, there definitely was, but I talk about this in the book too. There were definitely some key moments in my career where the culture of the organization didn't align with my expectation or what I wanted to get out of a work environment. And I thought naively that it was just one environment, right? And
Yeah.
so after I'd experienced similar things in multiple organizations, I just had a moment, and truthfully, when I quit my job, the last job when I worked for someone, I never went in with the intention on quitting. I think what had happened was it was a compilation of just bad behavior and by managers.
Mhm.
And I had reached a point where I felt confident in myself to say no more.
No more.
And I, quit my job and started my business the very next day.
Yeah, wow, that takes a leap of faith, doesn't it? Now I wonder, when that rush of quitting is over, because you do get that adrenaline. You say, hey, I'm empowered. I've made this decision. I'm going out on my own. When all of the dust settled, how did you start to feel shortly after that? Were you scared? What was the experience like?
Oh, I mean, the dust was settling as I was walking across the parking lot to my car. I I remember in like I said, in that moment, I had no intention on doing it, and
Mm,
so when it happened, it surprised me, to be honest, because I'm very controlled, I'm very disciplined, and I pride myself on that, but in that moment, I just could not take one more moment. And as I got to my car and on the drive home, I realized, I had to tell my husband what I had done. And fortunately, he has been an entrepreneur for much longer than I have, and he was incredibly supportive. And he said, "Well, what do you plan on doing?" And I explained to him that I, was prepared to start, and he said, "Great, I'll support you however you need me to." My family was supportive. I think they were probably questioning my judgment call, but but they also know that when I set my mind to something, when I make a decision to go do something, I will give it 100% of my effort.
He sounds like an amazing individual, and I think very much similar to my wife. Without that supportive mechanism to your side, do you think it would have been a lot more difficult for you?
Absolutely. I,
Mm.
I mean, for me, I knew taking that leap of faith was going to definitely impact the finances from a standpoint of, I was making a great income. I had more than enough money to live off of and save. And really, I knew that it wasn't going to impact the household, being that my husband, of course, already had his successful companies, but
Mhm.
it was really important to me that I was able to start earning and start, getting revenue into the business so that I could get back to the place where I started.
Where you started.
But a lot of people don't have that support. Like you said, if you have a wife that's supportive, it is difficult. And I will say it would have been much harder if I didn't have the support of my husband financially, and certainly, just the emotional support as well.
This is what I love about the My Future Business show, Julie, is that I guess it opens the pages a little bit about the people behind the business, because there are lives involved here. There are, things that we're responsible for. There's all these things to consider. So that's wonderful feedback, and I do appreciate you sharing it with us. Now, you have multiple businesses. Just introduce us to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've been involved in real estate for a little over 15 years. So I invest in different properties, here and there. So that one's one that I don't have to do a whole lot of management to. But the one where I spend most of my time is Junction Creative, and we are a full service digital marketing agency. I like to say we've grown up with digital, because when I started the agency, Facebook posting was the newest thing for businesses. So it probably dates me a little bit, but
Oh, me too.
no. But we've worked with, 450 different companies, from early stage to startup companies to the Fortune 1000. So definitely a labor of love. And that is my, first business, the one that I sort of stepped out and took on my own. And then as that business has grown, I've invested in other firms that, focus on strategy around process and people. But Junction is still my main effort.
Main go-to. Thank you again for sharing.
Mhm.
Now, you talked a little bit earlier about how working with challenging people, let's call them, in a previous work environment. I wonder, with that experience, because we know that that helps to form the people that we become. How has it
Mhm.
changed your leadership style, do you think?
Such a great question. It has impacted who I am. It's also impacted how I lead and how I've developed a leadership style. When I worked for my parents at the restaurant, my parents both managed very differently. They were different leaders, but I learned a lot of great tips from both of them. And then when I went into the corporate world, I did have a couple of really great mentors. My first boss at the Entrepreneurship Institute was instrumental in teaching me a lot more. But I have to say that those challenging experiences, dealing with, conflict and learning how to, resolve that conflict in the workplace, really showed me who I didn't want to be. And I feel like I have never forgotten how I felt in those moments of conflict with previous, whether it was managers or colleagues. And so I've tried in my own business to not become or not allow myself to act in those same ways. So, what I mean by that is, when I hire people that come into my organization, I will tell them, ego does not live here, including my own. And I do feel it's important for people to be kind and to work hard. And I always say to folks, don't mistake the kindness for weakness.
Oh, I love
Just
that.
because we're
Yeah.
kind doesn't mean that we're not working
That's
really,
one of
really
mine.
hard. Yeah.
I thought I was the only one who said that, but there you go.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
we talked a lot about similar things earlier, but in terms of that need to be consistent, that perseverance, that authenticity, and in achieving your dreams, how important have they become to you?
Yeah, persistence is a word I would say I use often. I am persistent. I think I called myself a hustler the other day because I hustle.
Yep.
I'm not afraid to roll up my sleeves and do it myself. Even as I started the process of writing my first book, Dare to Become, and going through the publishing process and starting to market the book, I realized at the end of the day, this is my labor of love. And while I can hire really great folks to help me market it, it still requires that I roll up my sleeves and I do the work. And so, I do persevere. I would also say I still have yet to figure out how to give up.
I love
there
it.
have been times, there have been times where maybe I should have given up on something, but I'm pretty persistent that way. And I do feel like if you can persevere through the good times and through the bad times, it really does set you up for longevity in business.
We have a great cross selection of different types of people, from existing business owners, large, medium, and small, to startup entrepreneurs, to those who are thinking about starting their own business. So I think on balance, there's obviously the upside, but there are also some downsides. So how important is it that you go through, I guess, somewhat of a failure now and then? And have you experienced it yourself? And how did you manage your way through it?
Failure is so important. I put this in the book. It's in the rising and the falling that we evolve, right? That is when we truly grow into the entrepreneur or the person that we're meant to be. And you can't have one without the other. And I truly believe that. And yes, I've suffered setbacks. I 6 years in, not 6 years, probably 3 years into the business, 3 or 4 years into the business, we had a large client that represented 80% of our revenue. And I was always fearful that we would lose it. And what would it do? Right. I had these employees, I had payroll. And, one day, and I cover this story in the book too. But I'll give you the abbreviated version. I was having a really high moment. I was at a pinch me moment presenting at a panel in New York City. Decided to have lunch at the Ritz to celebrate this career moment for myself. And I got a phone call from the stakeholder at our largest client saying that they were pulling all of their agency spend in house and that we had 90 days.
Oh,
And it was such a high and then met with an extreme low. Um, but I will say that after that moment, I did what I always do, which is I went back to the office, and over the next 90 days, I replaced that revenue with other clients.
it's
And
interesting. You talk about it's almost like a single source dependency issue, isn't it?
yes,
It's amazing how it affects your strategy thinking.
right. It does. It does. I mean, and I would say that's not the only challenge that I've had in the
Mm.
business. And I would say even after 15 years, we're still faced with those. But I do think that the way that I respond, or the way that you learn to make quick decisions so that you can get back on the right track, is incredibly important. And I do think that when you fail, you learn. Right. It doesn't mean that, yes, sometimes it's unfair. Sometimes it's terrible. I tell folks, go sit, sulk, cry, do what you need to do, be upset, but then, change your mindset, get back at it. Because at the end of the day, I always say to folks, we're always unemployable.
Yep.
So, just as soon as you get a large contract, you can lose one.
I just love this call. There's so much great content coming out of this. And before we shift gears and start talking about the book proper, tell me a little bit about, I guess, generational differences in managing different types of employees, workers, helpers, whatever you want to call them. How do you adapt in that? Given that you and I are both from a generation, then there's new generations coming through.
Yes, managing the generational divide is certainly not easy. I will say that I think what's incredibly unique about work environments is that you might have baby boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, and Gen Z all in the same work
Yes.
environment. And my approach to it is this, while I understand that technology is continuing to push the bounds for what we're capable of, so software systems have replaced older things or more manual processes that we've had before. What I will tell you is that if you're in an environment where you have multiple generations, it's a learning opportunity for everybody that is part of that. As you and I were talking, our experience growing up outside, being forced to manage ourselves at such a young age, the lessons that we've learned probably have shaped how we get things done in an office. Baby boomers, we have to give them a lot of credit because let's be honest, they didn't have email. I mean, they didn't have a lot of the tools that we have now that made their jobs easier. So when they started their career, they had to figure it out on their own.
Hmm.
And I think there are incredible and valuable lessons that we can learn. And even from millennials and Gen Z, I will say I pick up tips and tricks from them as well, because I've been in the space so long that sometimes I don't see that there's an easier, faster way to do something. So I would encourage any organization that has multiple generations to really embrace all of them and not only listen to the loudest one at the table.
Uh,
Because
yeah. Well, look, I tell you what, I love the fact that, you're willing to just sit here and put all the cards on the table and share your experience up to date. It's obviously been an amazing journey for you. So I guess that leads me to the point of what was the catalyst for the book? When did you decide to go on this journey?
yes, I have started this book probably 8 or 10 times over the last 10 or 15 years. I've gotten to the first paragraph and stopped. And largely because I don't think I fully had the story laid out in front of me. And in 2022, I had reached a milestone in business. I was very happy, very excited, but was also fearful because by achieving a goal, I had to set new goals. And I really found myself searching for inspiration. Obviously, this was post COVID. So we had just come through a really difficult time. The business was doing well, but as you know, the world really had suffered,
Mm,
as a result of what COVID had done to us. So I think for myself, I really was feeling that I needed something to motivate me. So I've always had a journal since the time I was 13. And I started reading these old journals from, my teenage years when I was, indignant and I can't wait to get out of here and live this big life. Um, and then, and then I read through my journals from my 20s and from the early days of starting Junction. And um, it made me realize just how far I had come, and that I had all of these big dreams and things that I wanted to do. And I had never stopped to take the time to realize that those dreams came true, right? I built a business. I've now written a book that will be published. And in the process of looking back, I actually found my way forward. And that's really how Dare to Become started. It really started as an homage to my parents and my family for teaching me such profound lessons in work ethic, which really was the foundation for my career, and it really set me up to be further ahead than what I might have been had I not had those experiences. So that's how the book came about.
yeah. Well, look, I tell you, when I read the title and looked at the cover, it painted a picture for me, and I think you nailed the title because I can picture myself having worked in a cubicle before, going from the corner to that central office. It is a bit of a journey. So, did
It
you
is.
spend much time with the title? How did you come about naming it Dare to Become?
So whenever I started the process, I hired an incredible book coach, Rick Wolf, who kept me on time and task. So I actually wrote the book in 6 months, believe it or not.
Wow.
I turned in pages every Tuesday. I got red lines on Thursday, and the next chapter was due the following Tuesday. So um, it really came pouring out of me. I know people say that a lot, but it actually did. And writing the book itself was not difficult because this was my journey. These were stories that were familiar to me. But Dare to Become really came from as we're getting closer to putting the book together. Rick had said, look, you've got to have an inscription, right? When you open the book, what do you want? What do you want people to read when they open the book? And so I wrote down, aspire to be, dare to become, because you have to aspire to be someone in order to dare yourself to become that person. And so that really was where the title came from. It was haphazard. We had another title that was like The Accidental Entrepreneur, which we also thought was great. But it was the inscription, aspire to be, dare to become, that then became the title of the book.
It is fantastic. I absolutely love it. Now, as an author myself, I remember going through the throes of, it was quite difficult for me at least. And you had a great journey with yours. I wonder, what did you learn about yourself when you got to the end of the book?
I don't know if you went through this, but I felt like writing the book was cathartic, but it was also, it shook me to my core because you relive certain things that you'd put in the past, or maybe you hadn't thought about for a decade or for 15 or for 20 years. I found it to be a, a very emotional process, and that when the book was done and the pages were complete, it was one of like, wow, like that's a lot, and that's just a chunk of what I've experienced. So the process of writing it, I felt like was very positive. I think the process of getting it published and getting it on the shelves is a totally different process that I'm
Totally
not
different.
so fond of.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder, when did you know it was finished? Because that's one of the things that many authors struggle with. They don't know when the end of the book is supposed to be. How did you decide that?
So when I was putting together the outline, I wanted to tell a full circle story, right? So I didn't want this book to be, here's how you start a business and here are the 10 things you need to do. That's not what this is.
More like a
This
manual.
is Yeah, this is a prescriptive bio. This is a book that's going to walk you through when you start, the things you're going to learn when you start your business, when you finance the business, when you hire your employees, when you are managing a multi-general work environment, and how do you handle communication, adversity, responsibility, accountability. And the last chapter of the book is actually, when do you know it's time to sell your business? And so at the end of the book, we do talk about different strategies and tactics, things that you should be thinking about, so that you always have the end in mind. You never start a business without knowing where it's going to go.
Yeah, great feedback. Now, do you prefer physical books or is it in digital format? Is it an audio book as well? Tell us about that side of it.
So we do have hard copy books that are going to be on the shelves on September 3rd. We also have an ebook that will publish on the same day, and we are currently working on the audiobook. So that one will be a couple weeks behind, but that one's also in
It's
process as
it's
well.
all coming. Look, anybody who's on this call today, be absolutely sure to visit the links that we're just about to make available to you. Now, when people do have access to this wonderful book, where are they going to be able to find it?
Yeah, so what's great is we're already available for pre-sale. So
Mhm.
on any major bookstore, whether it's Barnes and Noble, Amazon, you can find it on Hudson News. You can find it virtually on many bookstores all across the world. So you just have to Google the title and find your closest bookstore if you have a local bookstore that you love. It's also available on my website, www.juliecroppgareleck.com/shop. So you can actually purchase it on my website as well.
Excellent, absolutely. Now, don't forget to go get yourself a copy of that book. But Julie, I'd love to ask you about your speaking engagement. So, have you got any speaking engagements coming up?
Well, I am definitely working on a lot of different appearances, podcasts, radio shows, and certainly don't have any that are coming up here before September, but we'll be looking at some speaking engagements in some different cities in the Northeast and the Southeast. So stay tuned for
Yes.
my schedule.
There's going to have to be some book signing in there. I'm pretty sure and certain of that, Julie. Now, tell us a little bit about your podcast, Aspire to Be. I listened to some of it myself.
Yes, Aspire to Be is a new podcast. We've only gone through 8 episodes, but it really was inspired by this journey and is really my opportunity to listen to others' stories, much like you building this incredible platform and talking with so many amazing entrepreneurs and business owners. I want the opportunity for people to share their story because I know how instrumental it was for me to listen and learn from so many people that had gone through starting a business, selling a business, growing a business. And so my goal is just to continue to share those stories to inspire others, whether it's to grow their career or whether it is to take that leap of faith and invest in themselves.
A fantastic opportunity that podcast is going to turn out to be. Now, I know that there's going to be a lot of interested people that want to learn more. Maybe they want to work with you, Julie. So where is the best place to go to connect with you?
Absolutely. The best place to go is my website, www.juliecroppgareleck.com. There are links on that website if you are interested in whether it's having me participate for speaking or training. There's also a link directly to our consulting websites as well so that you can learn more about what we offer for businesses who are looking to grow, but also people that maybe are looking for inspiration within their own organizations.
And I can tell you what, I've actually visited Julie's website. It's fantastic. It's packed with great content. Links to every other, related site is on there. Links to the book. Everything is there for you. So below this post, you will find that link back to Julie and all of the wonderful work that she's doing, as well as her team. And with all that being said, Julie, this has absolutely been a jam-packed, great call. Thank you so very much for joining me on the show today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I appreciate all of the questions.